The heat in the barn. The barn door swung open before dawn, and Caleb Rowan raised his lantern expecting a coyote or a stray dog. Instead, he found a child crouched in the corner, her face smudged with dirt and desperation, chewing raw grain like an animal. She looked up at him with eyes that had already seen too much, hollow, haunted, and utterly without hope. In that moment, beneath the suffocating weight of a Wyoming summer, Caleb understood that some thefts aren't crimes at all. They're prayers whispered by the dying. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment with your city name below. I want to see how far Lena's story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. The summer of 1873 arrived in Wyoming territory like a fever that wouldn't break. By mid-June, the sun had baked the earth until it cracked open in long, jagged wounds that spiderwebbed across Caleb Rowan's fields. The creek that usually ran clear and cold had shrunk to a trickle, and the cottonwoods along its banks hung their leaves limp and colorless, surrendering to the heat. Caleb woke each morning before dawn, not because he was eager to face the day, but because sleep had become something he endured rather than enjoyed. The house was too quiet. It had been quiet for 3 years now. Ever since Martha and the baby she'd been carrying had both slipped away during a winter that had been as cruel as this summer was merciless. The silence had weight to it, pressing down on his chest until some mornings he wondered if he'd simply stop breathing and join them. He was 42 years old and felt ancient. On this particular morning, a Thursday, though the days had lost their distinctions, Caleb pulled on his worn boots and made his way across the yard toward the barn. The air was already thick, promising another day when the temperature would climb past bearable and settle somewhere between miserable and dangerous. The chickens hadn't even started their morning racket yet. Everything was still, suspended in that peculiar quiet that comes just before the world wakes up. The barn door was slightly ajar. Caleb stopped, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he'd propped against the porch rail. He'd closed that door last night. He was certain of it. In 3 years of living alone, he'd developed habits that bordered on ritual, and securing the barn was one of them. He picked up the rifle and approached slowly, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. He could hear something inside, a rustling. Small movements, deliberate but cautious. Coyote, he thought, or raccoons getting into the feed again. He pushed the door wider and raised his lantern. What he saw made him freeze. A child sat hunched in the corner near the grain barrel, her small hands cupped and raised to her mouth. In the lamplight, he could see her jaw working, chewing something. Her face was streaked with dirt, her hair a tangled mass of dark brown that hung past her shoulders. She wore a dress that might have been blue once, but was now so faded and stained it was hard to tell. No shoes. Her feet were cut and blistered, caked with dried blood and dust. She looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her face, wide, terrified, but also resigned, as if she'd been caught before and knew exactly what came next. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "Jesus Christ," Caleb whispered. The girl flinched at his voice but didn't run. She just stared at him, her throat working as she swallowed whatever she'd been eating. Raw grain, he realized. She'd been eating raw oats straight from the barrel. Caleb lowered the rifle slowly, setting it against the barn wall. He held up both hands, palms out. "Easy," he said quietly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl said nothing. Her breathing was quick and shallow, her whole body tense like a rabbit caught in the open. "What's your name?" Still nothing, just those eyes, watching him with an intensity that made his chest ache. "Are you hungry?" At that, something shifted in her expression, not quite hope, but a flicker of something desperate and raw. She nodded once, a tiny movement. Caleb's mind raced. A child. Alone. Eating grain meant for livestock, barefoot and clearly starving. Where had she come from? How long had she been here? "All right," he said softly. "All right. Come on inside. I've got real food. Bread. Maybe some bacon left from yesterday." The girl didn't move. "I'm not going to hurt you," he repeated. "You can leave whenever you want. But you shouldn't be eating that grain. It'll make you sick." She looked down at her cupped hands, still holding a few kernels of oats. Then slowly she let them fall to the floor. "My name's Caleb," he continued, keeping his voice low and even. "This is my farm. You're safe here." For another long moment, she just stared at him. Then, with movements so careful they were almost painful to watch, she stood up. She was small, maybe 9 or 10 years old, though malnutrition might have stunted her growth. She swayed slightly on her feet, and Caleb saw her grab the edge of the barrel to steady herself. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Her voice, when it finally came, was hoarse and thin. "Tuesday. 2 days." She'd been without food for 2 days, maybe longer. "Come on," Caleb said, gesturing toward the barn door. "Let's get you fed." She followed him across the yard, keeping a distance of about 10 feet, ready to bolt at any sign of danger. Caleb moved slowly, deliberately, not wanting to spook her. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, turning from black to deep purple. The heat was already building, rising up from the baked earth. Inside the house, Caleb lit the stove and set a kettle on to boil. The girl stood just inside the doorway, her eyes moving around the room, taking in everything: the table, the chairs, the shelf with Martha's few remaining dishes, the cold fireplace. "Sit," Caleb said, pulling out a chair. She sat on the very edge of it, her spine straight, ready to run. He pulled out the bread he'd bought in town 3 days ago, cut several thick slices, and set them on a plate. He added butter, then went to the cold box for the bacon. While he worked, he kept talking, filling the silence. "I live alone here," he said. "Just me and some chickens. Used to have more livestock, but I sold most of it off. Didn't need much anymore." He set the plate in front of her and stepped back. The girl looked at the food, then at him, then back at the food. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bread. "Go ahead," Caleb said gently. "It's yours." She ate like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be full. Fast, desperate bites, barely chewing before swallowing. Caleb watched with a growing sense of horror and anger. How long had she been starving? Who had let this happen? When she'd finished the bread and bacon, he set a glass of water in front of her. She drank it in long gulps, water running down her chin. "More?" he asked. She nodded. He refilled the glass twice more before she finally sat back, her small hand resting on her stomach. "Better?" Another nod. Caleb pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. The sun was fully up now, light streaming through the window and catching the dust motes in the air. He could already feel the heat seeping into the house. "You got a name?" he asked again. This time she answered, "Lena." "Lena," he repeated. "That's a good name. Where are you from, Lena?" She looked down at her hands. They were small and dirty, the nails broken and rimmed with grime. "Town," she said quietly. "Marston?" The nearest town was about 8 miles east. "You walked from Marston?" She nodded. "When?" "Yesterday. Night before, maybe." Caleb felt his chest tighten. 8 miles, barefoot, in this heat. She could have died. "Who are you running from?" At that, her whole body went rigid. Fear flooded back into her eyes, sharp and immediate. "Hey," Caleb said quickly. "It's all right. You don't have to tell me. But Lena, people are going to be looking for you. If you're from town, someone knows you're missing." "No one cares," she whispered. Those 3 words hit him harder than anything else she could have said. "That can't be true." "It is." Her voice was flat, empty. "He doesn't care. He's probably glad I'm gone." "Who's he?" She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. Finally she said, "My uncle, Garrick Frost." Caleb knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew Garrick Frost. He ran the largest mercantile in Marston, controlled most of the freight that moved through the region, and had his fingers in half the business deals that happened within 50 miles. Respected, wealthy, connected. "Garrick Frost is your uncle?" Lena nodded miserably. "And you ran away from him?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked up at him then, and the expression on her face was one Caleb would never forget. It was the look of someone who'd learned that adults couldn't be trusted, that kindness was a lie, that survival meant staying quiet and invisible. "Because he was going to let me die," she said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Caleb felt something shift inside his chest. A door he'd locked 3 years ago, when he'd buried Martha and their unborn son, creaked open just a fraction. He'd sworn he wouldn't care about anyone ever again. It hurt too much. But looking at this small, broken child sitting at his table, he realized that some things you can't choose. Compassion isn't optional. It just is. Lena, he said carefully, I need you to tell me what happened, all of it. She took a shaky breath. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she began. Her parents had died 6 months ago. Her father in a logging accident, her mother 2 weeks later from pneumonia. There had been no other family except Garrick, her father's younger brother. He'd taken her in, and at first it had seemed like mercy. But Garrick Frost was not a merciful man. He'd put Lena to work in his household, cooking and cleaning and caring for his 2 younger children. She woke before dawn and worked until after dark. She slept in a small room off the kitchen, more of a closet than a bedroom. And slowly, the food portions got smaller. Breakfast became a piece of bread. Lunch disappeared entirely. Dinner was whatever scraps were left after Garrick and his family had eaten. He said I had to earn my keep, Lena said, her voice hollow. He said I was a burden, that he didn't have to take me in, and if I didn't work, I didn't eat. Caleb's hands curled into fists on the table. He'd lock me in the cellar if I made mistakes, she continued, sometimes for a whole day. It was dark down there, cold. I thought maybe if I just worked harder, did everything right, he'd stop. But it kept getting worse. What happened 2 days ago? I burned the bread. Her voice cracked. It was an accident. I was so tired and I fell asleep for just a minute while it was baking. When I woke up, the kitchen was full of smoke. Garrick, he was so angry. He said I was useless. He said I was a waste of food and space. He locked me in the cellar and said he wasn't going to feed me anymore until I learned my lesson. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't make a sound. I stayed down there for a day. Maybe longer. I lost track. And I realized he wasn't going to let me out. He was going to let me starve down there. So when I heard the house get quiet, I climbed out through the cellar window. It's small, but I'm small too. And I ran. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dirt. I didn't know where to go. I just walked. I thought maybe if I got far enough away, I'd find someone who'd help. But everyone in town knows Garrick. They respect him. They wouldn't believe me. So you came here. I saw your barn. I thought I could hide. Just for a little while. I was so hungry. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm sorry I stole your grain. You didn't steal anything, Caleb said firmly. You survived. There's a difference. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fields shimmering in the heat. His mind was working, turning over options. He could take her back to town, report what she'd told him. But would anyone believe a child over Garrick Frost? Doubtful. And even if they did, what then? She'd be put in an orphanage, or worse, sent back to Garrick with a warning that would only make things more dangerous for her. He could keep her here, at least temporarily, give her time to heal, to eat, to sleep without fear. But that carried its own risks. If Garrick came looking for her, and he would, if only to protect his reputation, things could get ugly. Lena, Caleb said, turning back to face her, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What happened to you? What Garrick did? That's not right. It's not legal, and it's sure as hell not moral. You didn't deserve any of it. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes, waiting. I can't promise I know how to fix this, he continued, but I can promise you this. You're safe here. As long as you want to stay, this is your home. You'll eat, you'll sleep, and no one is going to hurt you. Do you understand? For the first time since he'd found her, something like hope flickered across her face. You mean it? She whispered. I mean it. She started crying then, really crying, her small body shaking with sobs. Caleb moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. He didn't touch her. He sensed she needed space, but he stayed close. It's all right, he said softly. You're all right now. It took a long time for her to stop crying. When she finally did, she looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen. Let's get you cleaned up, Caleb said. Then you can sleep. There's a spare room upstairs. It's yours now. He heated water and filled a basin, then left her alone to wash while he changed the sheets on the bed in the small room that had once been meant for a child he'd never gotten to meet. When Lena emerged, her face scrubbed clean, Her hair still damp and tangled, she looked even younger than before. He showed her to the room. She stood in the doorway, staring at the bed like she didn't quite believe it was real. "Go on," Caleb said. "Sleep as long as you need." She climbed into the bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Her eyes were already closing. "Mr. Caleb?" she murmured. "Yeah? Thank you." "Get some rest, Lena." He closed the door part way and went back downstairs. The house felt different now, less empty, less haunted. He sat at the table and stared at the plate she'd eaten from, the water glass still marked with her small fingerprints. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the heat pressed down on the land like a physical force. Somewhere in Marston, Garrick Frost was probably just waking up, discovering that his niece was gone. Soon, he'd start looking. Caleb stood and walked to the gun cabinet. He pulled out the rifle and the pistol, checking both carefully. Then he loaded them and set them within easy reach. He'd meant what he told Lena. She was safe here, and anyone who tried to change that would have to go through him first. The first day passed quietly. Lena slept until late afternoon, and when she finally woke, Caleb made her eggs and toast. She ate more slowly this time, savoring each bite. She didn't talk much, and Caleb didn't push. He let her follow him around as he did his chores, watching as he fed the chickens and checked the water levels in the trough. The heat was brutal. By midday, the air shimmered and wavered, and even the insects seemed to move in slow motion. Caleb showed Lena where he kept the cool water in the spring house, a small stone structure built over the one reliable spring on his property. "Anytime you're thirsty, you come here," he said. "Don't wait. This heat'll kill you if you're not careful." She nodded solemnly. That night, he made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. They ate together at the table, and afterward, Lena helped him wash the dishes without being asked. Her movements were practiced, efficient, the result of months of forced labor. "You don't have to do that," Caleb said. "I don't mind," she replied quietly. But he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at him as if waiting for punishment. "Lena," he said gently, "this isn't like before. You're not working for your keep here. You're just here, because you deserve to be." She looked at him with confusion, as if the concept was foreign. "I don't understand," she said. "I know, but you will. Give it time." On the second day, reality began to intrude. Caleb rode into town early in the morning, leaving Lena with strict instructions to stay inside and keep the doors locked. He needed supplies, but more than that, he needed to hear what people were saying. If Garrick had reported her missing, the town would be buzzing with it. Marston was a small town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Caleb tied his horse outside the general store. Not Frost's Mercantile, but the smaller competitor on the opposite end of the main street, and went inside. The proprietor, a man named Samuel Chen, looked up from the counter and nodded. "Caleb, hot enough for you?" "And then some," Caleb replied. He moved through the store, gathering flour, sugar, coffee, listening. Two women were talking near the fabric display. "Heard she ran off, just up and disappeared. Garrick must be beside himself, that poor man taking in his brother's child, and this is how she repays him. Children these days have no gratitude." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He kept his head down, focusing on his list. At the counter, Samuel rang up his purchases. "Heard you've been keeping to yourself out there," he said conversationally. "Nothing new about that." "True enough, but there's been talk. Garrick Frost's niece ran away. He's offering a reward for information about her whereabouts." Caleb's hand stilled on his wallet. "That's so?" $20. Says she's disturbed. Grief from losing her parents made her unstable. He's worried she'll hurt herself. "She got a name?" "Lena. Lena Frost." Caleb paid for his supplies, keeping his expression neutral. "Hope they find her safe." "Me too. Heat like this, a child alone, doesn't bear thinking about." Caleb loaded his purchases into his saddlebags and rode out of town. His mind was racing. Garrick was already spinning the narrative, painting Lena as unstable, himself as the concerned guardian. If she turned up now, who would people believe? A well-respected merchant or a traumatized child? When he got back to the farm, Lena was waiting by the window, her face pressed against the glass. She relaxed visibly when she saw him. I thought you weren't coming back, she said. I told you I would, Caleb replied. I keep my promises. That night, after dinner, he sat her down and told her what he'd heard. He's lying, Lena said, her voice tight with anger. I'm not crazy. I'm not. I know, Caleb said firmly. I believe you. But Lena, this is bigger than I thought. He's not just looking for you. He's making sure that when you're found, no one will believe anything you say. Fear crept back into her eyes. What do I do? You stay here, stay hidden, and we figure out our next move. What if he finds me? Caleb met her gaze steadily. Then he goes through me first. And I promise you, Lena, that's not going to be easy for him. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Lena helped around the house, but Caleb made sure she understood it was her choice, not an obligation. She was skittish at first, flinching at sudden movements, apologizing for the smallest mistakes. But slowly, gradually, she began to relax. She started talking more about her parents, about the life she'd had before they died. Her father had been a logger, strong and kind. Her mother had taught her to read and write, rare skills for a girl her age. They'd been happy, she said, poor but happy. I miss them, she said one evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set. Every day. I know, Caleb said. He thought of Martha, of the baby he'd never gotten to hold. Missing them is how you know they mattered. She looked at him thoughtfully. Do you miss someone? Yeah, my wife, and a child we never got to meet. I'm sorry. Me too. They sat in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to orange to deep purple. The heat of the day was finally breaking, a slight breeze stirring the air. Mr. Caleb? You can just call me Caleb. Caleb, do you think things can get better? Even after they've been really bad? He looked at her, this small, fierce girl who'd survived things no child should have to endure. Yeah, he said. I think they can. And for the first time in 3 years, he almost believed it. But the peace couldn't last. On the 7th day, just as the sun was beginning its descent, Caleb saw the dust on the horizon. Riders. 3 of them, coming fast. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out onto the porch. Lena appeared behind him, her face pale. Get inside, he said quietly. Upstairs. Don't come down unless I call for you. Caleb, go, now. She disappeared into the house. Caleb heard her footsteps on the stairs, the sound of a door closing. The riders came closer. He could make them out now, 3 men, well-dressed, well-armed, and leading them, mounted on a black horse that gleamed like polished coal, was Garrick Frost. Garrick Frost dismounted with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to making entrances. He was in his mid-40s, tall and well-fed, with dark hair graying at the temples, and a face that had learned long ago how to project authority. His suit was expensive, tailored, entirely impractical for the brutal heat, but perfectly calibrated to remind everyone who saw him of his wealth and position. The 2 men flanking him remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their holstered pistols. Caleb stayed on the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. He didn't speak. He just waited. Garrick took his time, surveying the property with the critical eye of a man appraising merchandise. His gaze swept across the weathered barn, the dry fields, the simple farmhouse with its peeling paint. When his eyes finally settled on Caleb, his expression was one of mild distaste, as if he'd found something unpleasant stuck to his boot. Mr. Rowan, Garrick said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough warmth to sound reasonable. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm Garrick Frost. I don't believe we've had the pleasure. I know who you are, Caleb said evenly. Then you've saved me an introduction. Garrick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm looking for my niece, a young girl, 9 years old, dark hair, about this tall. He held his hand at roughly Lena's height. Her name is Lena. She's been missing for over a week now, and I'm quite worried about her. Sorry to hear that, Caleb said. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Garrick's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind it. Are you certain? It's a small territory, not many places a child could hide. If I'd seen a lost child, I'd have brought her to town myself. Of course you would. Garrick took a step closer to the porch. You understand my concern, I'm sure. The poor girl has been through tremendous trauma, losing both parents within weeks of each other. It's damaged her mentally. She has episodes, delusions. Sometimes she says things that aren't true, believes things that never happened. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. That's so. I'm afraid so. I took her in out of family obligation, but she's proven difficult, ungrateful. She makes wild accusations, invents stories about mistreatment. It's the grief, of course. I have the utmost sympathy for what she's endured, but she needs proper care, medical attention, not to be wandering the countryside alone in this heat. Sounds like you've got it all figured out, Caleb said. Garrick's eyes narrowed slightly. Mr. Rowan, I'll be direct. I have reason to believe my niece may have come this way. Your property is isolated. A frightened child might see that as safety. If she's here, I need to know, for her own good. And I told you, she's not. One of the mounted men shifted in his saddle. His hand moved closer to his gun. Caleb noticed but didn't react, keeping his attention fixed on Garrick. You won't mind if we look around then, Garrick said. It wasn't a question. Actually, I would mind, Caleb replied calmly. This is private property. You've got no authority here. I could get the marshal involved. Then get him. But until you do, you and your men need to leave. For a long moment, the air between them crackled with tension. Garrick's pleasant mask slipped, revealing something harder and uglier underneath. But he was smart enough to know when to retreat. He wasn't going to win this confrontation through intimidation alone, not with Caleb armed and standing on his own land. Very well, Garrick said, his voice tight. But I should warn you, Mr. Rowan, harboring a runaway child has legal consequences. If I find out you've been lying to me, I'll see you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I have considerable influence in this territory. I'm sure you do, Caleb said. Now get off my property. Garrick remounted his horse with deliberate slowness, making it clear he was leaving on his own terms, not because he'd been ordered to. He looked back at the house one more time, his gaze lingering on the upstairs windows. I'll be back, he said quietly. With proper authority. I'll be here. The three men turned their horses and rode away, their pace unhurried. Caleb watched until they disappeared over the rise, swallowed by the heat shimmer and dust. Only then did he lower the rifle and let out the breath he'd been holding. Lena, he called. They're gone. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face ghostly pale. I heard everything. I know you did. Come down here. She descended slowly, her hand gripping the banister. When she reached the bottom, she looked up at him with eyes full of questions and fear. He's going to come back, she said, and next time he'll have the law with him. Maybe, Caleb admitted. But that gives us time. Time for what? Caleb set the rifle down and pulled out a chair at the table. Sit. We need to talk. She sat, and he took the chair across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Lena, what Garrick said out there, about you having delusions, making up stories, that's not just talk. He's building a case, making sure that if anyone questions what happened to you, they'll dismiss it as the imaginings of a traumatized child. But I'm not making it up, she said, her voice rising. Everything I told you was true. He starved me. He locked me in the cellar. I believe you, Caleb interrupted firmly. But belief isn't enough. We need proof. Or at the very least, we need someone with authority who'll listen. No one will. Everyone respects him. Everyone owes him something. Not everyone. Caleb thought for a moment. There's a territorial marshal who comes through Marston sometimes. Name's Jacob Brennan. I've met him a few times. He's honest. Doesn't owe Garrick anything, as far as I know. When does he come through? That's the problem. It's irregular. Could be 2 weeks, could be 2 months. Lena's shoulders sagged. So we just hide and hope? No, we prepare. If Garrick comes back with the local law, I'll cooperate, up to a point. I'll let them search the property, but you won't be here. She looked confused. Where will I be? There's a cave system about 2 miles north of here, up in the rocks. Used to play there when I was a kid. It's well hidden, stays cool even in this heat. I'll take you there tomorrow, show you the way. If anyone shows up, you run there and wait until I come get you. For how long? As long as it takes. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked, What if they take you away? What if Garrick gets you arrested for helping me? That's a risk, Caleb admitted, but it's my risk to take. Why? Her voice broke slightly. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Caleb looked at her, this small, fierce girl who'd been betrayed by the one person who should have protected her. He thought about all the things he could say, that it was the right thing to do, that he couldn't live with himself if he didn't, that somewhere, somehow, Martha would have expected it of him. But what he said was simpler and more true. "Because someone has to," he said, "and right now, that someone is me." That night, Caleb barely slept. He lay in bed listening to the house settle, the distant sounds of night creatures, the whisper of hot wind through the dry grass. In the room down the hall, Lena was sleeping, or at least lying still. He suspected she wasn't sleeping much either. Around 3 in the morning, he heard her door creak open, soft footsteps in the hallway. Then nothing. He got up quietly and found her standing at the window in the main room, looking out at the moonlit yard. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I keep thinking he's going to come back, that I'll wake up and he'll be standing there. He won't get past me. You can't watch all the time. You have to sleep eventually." It was a fair point. Caleb moved to stand beside her at the window. The landscape outside was silver and black, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. "When I was younger," he said, "I used to be afraid of a lot of things. The dark, thunder. My father, when he'd been drinking, I'd lie awake at night, rigid with fear, waiting for something bad to happen." "What did you do?" "One night my mother found me like that. She sat on the edge of my bed and said something I've never forgotten. She said fear is just another kind of weather. Comes and goes, you can't stop it, but you can learn to wait it out." Lena considered this. "Did it help?" "Eventually. Took me years to really understand what she meant. But yeah, it helped." They stood in silence for a while. Then Lena said, "Your mother sounds like she was nice." "She was. Died when I was 15. Fever. I'm sorry. Long time ago now." He glanced at her. "You should try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Will you tell me about your wife?" The question came suddenly, unexpected. "If you don't mind." Caleb felt the familiar ache in his chest, but it was duller now, worn smooth by time. "What do you want to know?" "What was she like?" "She was strong," he said after a moment. "Not physically, she was small, like you, but strong in ways that mattered. When she believed something was right, nothing could move her. She could be stubborn as hell." He smiled slightly at the memory. "We used to argue about the stupidest things. How to plant the garden, whether to get chickens or ducks. She always won. Not because she was louder, but because she'd wear me down with logic until I had to admit she was right." "Did you love her very much?" "Yeah, I did." "Do you still?" The question was innocent but piercing. Caleb thought about it honestly. "I'll always love what we had. But I'm learning that loving someone doesn't mean you stop living when they're gone. It means you carry them forward. Make choices they'd be proud of." Lena looked up at him. "Do you think she'd be proud of you helping me?" "I'd like to think so." She nodded slowly, then turned back to the window. After another moment, she said, "I'm going to try to sleep now." "All right. You know where I am if you need me." She went back to her room, and Caleb returned to his bed. But he still didn't sleep. He lay there thinking about choices and consequences, about the life he'd built alone, and the life that was suddenly intruding on it. He'd meant what he'd told Lena. This was the right thing to do. But right didn't always mean easy, and it didn't guarantee safety. Morning came too fast. Caleb made breakfast, eggs and toast and coffee, and they ate in companionable silence. Afterward, he packed supplies, water, dried meat, a blanket, matches, a knife. "We're going to walk to the caves now," he said. "I want you to know the way by heart. We'll go slow, mark landmarks. If you ever need to go there alone, you'll be able to find it even in the dark." They set out across the property, heading north toward the rocky hills that rose like broken teeth from the flat prairie. The sun was already punishing, turning the air thick and heavy. Lena walked beside him, her shorter legs working double time to keep up, but she didn't complain. Caleb pointed out markers as they went. "See that lightning-struck tree? That's your first landmark. From here, you head toward those 3 boulders that look like a stack of coins. From the boulders, you'll see a gap in the rocks. That's the entrance to the cave system. The walk took 45 minutes. By the time they reached the rocks, Lena was flushed and sweating, but her eyes were bright with concentration. She was memorizing everything. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, but it opened into a larger chamber beyond. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. The stone walls held the coolness of deep earth, a blessed relief from the brutal sun. Caleb lit a match and showed her around. The main chamber was about 15 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand in comfortably. Smaller passages branched off in two directions, leading deeper into the hill. "You stay in this main room," he said. "Don't go exploring the side passages. It's easy to get lost." He showed her where he'd cached supplies. A tin box wedged into a crevice containing more matches, candles, a tin cup, and some hardtack wrapped in oilcloth. Not much, but enough to survive for a few days if necessary. "If you have to come here, you wait," he said. "Don't leave until I come get you, or until 3 days have passed. If 3 days go by and I haven't come, you head east, stay off the roads. There's a ranch about 15 miles east, the Double Bar 7. Run by a man named Thomas Wade. He's decent. Tell him what happened. He'll help you." 3 days? Lena repeated. "East to the Double Bar 7. "Right. But it won't come to that." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not going to let it." They sat in the cave for a while, letting the coolness seep into their bones. Lena explored the chamber, running her hands along the smooth stone walls, peering into the dark passages with curious caution. "It's peaceful here," she said. "Yeah. I used to come here when I needed to think, or hide from chores." He smiled slightly. "My father never could find me when I didn't want to be found. Thank you for showing me. It's yours now. Your safe place." On the walk back, they moved more slowly, Lena turning every few minutes to look back, cementing the route in her memory. By the time they reached the house, it was past noon and the heat was at its worst. They stayed inside, keeping the windows shuttered against the sun. The days that followed were tense but quiet. Caleb went about his usual work, but he was always watchful, always listening for the sound of approaching horses. Lena helped where she could, but mostly she stayed close to the house, ready to run at a moment's notice. On the 4th day after Garrick's visit, a rider came. Just one this time. Caleb recognized him as he approached. Deputy Tom Haskins, a local lawman who worked out of Marston. He was young, maybe 25, with an eager face and a new badge that still shone bright in the sun. Caleb met him in the yard, rifle conspicuously absent this time. He wanted this encounter to stay civil. "Deputy," he said with a nod. "Mr. Rowan?" Haskins dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm following up on a report about a missing child, Garrick Frost's niece. He was here a few days ago asking about that." "I know. He mentioned you weren't cooperative." "I was honest. I told him I hadn't seen her. That's still true." Haskins shifted his weight. "Mr. Frost is pretty insistent that she might have come this way. Says your property is isolated, perfect place for a scared child to hide. He's requested that I conduct a search." "You got a warrant?" "No, sir. I'm asking as a courtesy. If you refuse, I can get one, but that'll take time and create hard feelings all around." Caleb studied the young deputy. He seemed genuine, not in Garrick's pocket. At least not yet. "You work for Garrick Frost, deputy?" "I work for the law, sir." "That's not always the same thing." Haskins flushed slightly. "No, sir, it's not." Caleb made a show of considering, then nodded. "All right, search all you want, but I'm coming with you. Don't want any confusion about what you did or didn't find." "That's fair." They walked the property together, Haskins checking the barn, the outbuildings, even the spring house. He was thorough but respectful, not tearing things apart or making a mess. Inside the house, he looked in closets and under beds, his expression growing increasingly puzzled. "Mind if I check upstairs?" he asked. "Go ahead." Haskins climbed to the 2nd floor. Caleb heard him moving from room to room. When he came back down, he looked apologetic. "Nothing," he said. "I'm sorry to have troubled you." "You were doing your job." "Mr. Frost isn't going to be happy." "That's between you and him." Caleb walked him to the door. "Can I ask you something, deputy?" "Sure." "This girl, Lena, what do you know about her situation?" Haskins hesitated. Just what Mr. Frost told me, that she's disturbed, grief-stricken, prone to making up stories. And you believe him? I don't have reason not to. Mr. Frost is a respected man. Respect isn't the same as honesty. The deputy met his eyes. You know something I should know? I know that scared children don't run away from good homes, and I know that men with clean reputations sometimes work very hard to keep them that way. Haskins frowned. Are you saying... I'm not saying anything, just making an observation. Caleb opened the door. But if I were you, I'd think carefully about whose word you're taking at face value. The deputy left looking troubled, and Caleb watched him right away. When he was certain Haskins was gone, he walked to the northern edge of his property and signaled, a simple wave of his hat. A few minutes later, Lena emerged from the rocks, small and distant but unmistakable. She'd been watching from near the cave entrance. By the time she made it back to the house, she was out of breath and anxious. He searched everything, she said. He did. Found nothing. You're still safe. For how long? It was the same question she'd asked before, and Caleb still didn't have a good answer. But that night, sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold, something occurred to him. Lena, he said, tomorrow I'm going to teach you to shoot. She looked at him, startled. A gun? A rifle. Nothing you can't handle. You need to be able to protect yourself if it comes to that. Will it come to that? I don't know, but I'd rather you be ready and not need it than need it and not be ready. The next morning he set up targets behind the barn, old bottles and cans arranged on fence posts. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze the trigger instead of pulling it. The first shot kicked her shoulder back and sent the bullet wide, missing the target entirely. But she didn't flinch or cry. She just set her jaw and said, again. By the end of the afternoon, she could hit 3 out of 5 targets. Not perfect, but good enough. You're a natural, Caleb said. I don't feel natural. I feel scared. Scared is smart. Scared keeps you alive. It's panic that kills you. That night, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Lena said something that caught him off guard. When this is over, if it's ever over, what happens to me? Caleb paused, dish towel in hand. What do you mean? I mean, I can't stay here forever, can I? The question hung in the air between them. Caleb realized he'd been avoiding thinking about the future, focusing only on the immediate crisis. But she was right. Eventually something would have to give. Either Garrick would give up or he'd escalate. Either the law would intervene or it wouldn't. And when the dust settled, Lena would still need a home. Do you want to stay here? He asked carefully. She looked down at her hands. I don't want to be a burden. That's not what I asked. I like it here, she said quietly. I feel safe. For the first time in a long time, I feel safe. Then you stay, Caleb said. As long as you want. As long as it takes. We'll figure out the legal details when we have to. But Lena, you're not a burden. You're just a kid who deserves a chance. She looked up at him with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. You really mean that? I really mean that. She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. And in that moment, Caleb understood that somewhere along the way, without quite realizing it, he'd stopped thinking of her as a temporary responsibility and started thinking of her as something else entirely. Not a replacement for the child he'd lost. Nothing could be that. But maybe, just maybe, a second chance at being the person he'd wanted to be before grief had hollowed him out. The heat continued, relentless and unforgiving. The days blurred together in a haze of vigilance and routine. Caleb taught Lena more than just shooting. He taught her how to track the sun's position, how to find water in dry country, how to read the behavior of animals to predict danger. Skills for survival. Skills she might need if the worst happened. And then, on a Thursday morning 2 weeks after the deputy's visit, the worst began to happen. Caleb was in the barn when he heard the sound of many horses. Not 3 this time, more like 10. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out into the sunlight, squinting against the glare. What he saw made his blood run cold. Garrick Frost rode at the head of a group that included Deputy Haskins, 2 other men in badges Caleb didn't recognize, and 6 hired guns, hard-faced men with the look of professionals. They spread out across his property like an occupying army, cutting off all avenues of escape. Garrick dismounted, and this time his expression held none of the false pleasantness from before. This time there was only cold determination. "Mr. Rowan," he said, "I'm done asking nicely." Caleb kept his rifle low but ready, his eyes moving across the line of men arrayed before him. 10 against 1. The math wasn't good, but he'd faced worse odds before. What worried him more was the presence of the badges. Garrick had brought the law with him this time, which meant he'd found a way to make this official. "You've got no business here, Frost," Caleb said evenly. "I have every business here." Garrick pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and held it up. "This is a court order signed by Judge Harold Pemberton, granting me the right to search this property for my missing niece. Deputy Haskins has already conducted one search and found nothing, but I have reason to believe you've been hiding her." "What reason would that be?" "A witness saw a child matching Lena's description near your property 3 days ago. A girl with dark hair wearing a faded blue dress." Garrick's smile was thin and sharp. The same dress Lena was wearing when she ran away. Caleb's mind raced. 3 days ago, Lena had been practicing her route to the caves. She'd stayed close to the rocks, but the territory was open. Anyone with a spyglass watching from the right position might have caught a glimpse. He kept his expression neutral. "Don't know what your witness thinks they saw, but there's no child here. Deputy Haskins already confirmed that." "Then you won't mind if we conduct a more thorough search." Garrick gestured to his men, "including the surrounding area." That was the real danger. If they searched the hills, they'd find the caves eventually. And if they found the caves, they'd find Lena. Deputy Haskins dismounted and walked forward, his young face troubled. "Mr. Rowan, I have to enforce this order. I'm sorry, but that's the law." "The law," Caleb said quietly, "is supposed to protect people, not hunt them down." "I'm just doing my job." "You keep saying that like it makes it right." One of the other badge-wearing men stepped forward. He was older than Haskins, with a weathered face and cold eyes. "You going to cooperate, or do we have a problem?" Caleb recognized him now. Travis Keene, a territorial officer with a reputation for brutality and a relationship with Garrick that went back years. He was the kind of lawman who'd learned to confuse authority with power. "No problem," Caleb said. "Search the house. Search the barn. But you stay off the northern section of my property. That land's not stable. Rattlesnakes and loose rock. Someone gets hurt, that's on you." "We'll take our chances," Keene said. He turned to the hired guns. 4 of you search the buildings. The rest of you come with me. We're checking those hills." Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle. If he tried to stop them by force, they'd arrest him or worse. If he let them go, they'd find Lena within the hour. The choice was impossible, and Garrick knew it. The man stood there watching with barely concealed satisfaction, waiting to see which way Caleb would break. But before anyone could move, a new sound cut through the tension, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats, fast and purposeful. Everyone turned to look. A single rider crested the rise to the east, pushing his horse hard. As he drew closer, Caleb felt a surge of hope. The rider wore a badge that caught the sunlight, but it was different from the local tin stars. This was federal silver. Marshal Jacob Brennan had arrived. He was a man in his early 50s, lean and weathered, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. He reined his horse to a stop and surveyed the scene with the calm assessment of someone who'd walked into worse situations and lived to tell about it. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easy authority, "looks like quite a gathering." Garrick's expression tightened, but he recovered quickly. "Marshal Brennan, I didn't realize you were in the area. Just passing through. Saw the dust and thought I'd investigate." His gaze moved to Caleb. "Mr. Rowan, you all right?" "Been better, Marshal." Brennan dismounted and walked his horse forward, his movements unhurried. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" "Family matter," Garrick said smoothly. "My niece ran away. We have reason to believe she's hiding on Mr. Rowan's property. I have a court order authorizing a search." "Let me see it." Garrick handed over the paper. Brennan read it slowly, his face impassive. When he finished, he looked at Garrick with an expression that might have been curiosity or might have been suspicion. "Judge Pemberton signed this?" "Yesterday afternoon." "Interesting. I spoke with Judge Pemberton yesterday morning. He was heading to Denver for a medical conference, wasn't planning to hear any cases before he left. The silence that followed was profound. Garrick's face flushed slightly. Perhaps it was the day before. I may have misremembered. Perhaps. Brennan folded the paper and handed it back. Either way, this order authorizes a search of the property, not the surrounding land. Those hills aren't part of Mr. Rowan's deeded acreage. Keene stepped forward. Marshal, with respect, we have credible evidence. With respect, Officer Keene, I outrank you. And I'm telling you that you'll conduct your search according to the letter of this order, nothing more. Brennan's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Am I making myself clear? Keene's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Crystal. Good. Then let's get this done properly. Brennan turned to Caleb. Mr. Rowan, you have any objection to these men searching your house and outbuildings? Caleb understood what was happening. Brennan was giving him cover, buying time. No objection, Marshal. I've got nothing to hide. Then let's proceed. Mr. Frost, you'll wait out here with me while the search is conducted. Your hired men can wait as well. Only the officers go inside. Garrick looked like he wanted to argue, but with Brennan standing there radiating federal authority, he had no ground to stand on. He gave a curt nod. Haskins and Keene entered the house with 2 other deputies. Caleb stayed outside with Brennan, acutely aware of the hired guns positioned around the property. The marshal seemed relaxed, but Caleb noticed his hand rested casually near his sidearm. Interesting situation you've got here, Mr. Rowan, Brennan said quietly. Seems to be a lot of that going around. Care to tell me your side? Not much to tell. Man's looking for his niece, says she ran away. I haven't seen her. Brennan studied him for a moment. You know what I find curious? In my experience, when a child runs away from a loving home, the guardian comes looking worried, scared. When they run away from a bad home, the guardian comes looking angry. Mr. Frost over there doesn't look worried to me. No, Caleb agreed. He doesn't. The search took 20 minutes. When the officers emerged, Haskins shook his head. Nothing, Marshal. No sign of any child. Outbuildings? Checked them all. Nothing. Brennan turned to Garrick. There you have it. Your niece isn't here. She was seen by a witness whose identity you haven't disclosed, who saw someone who might have been a child from a distance, in this heat, which creates mirages and distortions. Brennan's tone was mild but unyielding. That's not evidence, Mr. Frost. That's speculation. I want those hills searched, and I want a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm entitled to them. Brennan gestured to the assembled men. You've conducted your court-ordered search. It's done. Time for everyone to move along. Garrick's face had gone dark with barely suppressed rage. This isn't over. Perhaps not, but it's over for today. For a moment, Caleb thought Garrick might do something reckless. The man's hand twitched toward his coat, and the hired guns shifted in their saddles. But Brennan simply stood there, utterly calm, his presence a reminder that escalation would end badly for everyone. Finally, Garrick mounted his horse. You're making a mistake, Marshal. Wouldn't be the first time. But I'll sleep fine tonight knowing I followed the law instead of a man's wounded pride. Garrick wheeled his horse around and rode off without another word. The hired guns followed, then Keene and the other deputies. Only Haskins lingered for a moment, looking between Brennan and Caleb with an expression that suggested he was beginning to question whose side he should be on. Deputy, Brennan said, you're dismissed. Haskins nodded and rode after the others. When the dust had settled and they were alone, Brennan turned to Caleb. They'll be watching the roads and the obvious routes out of here, which means if there's someone you need to keep safe, they're going to have to stay very well hidden for a while longer. Caleb met his eyes. I appreciate your help, Marshal. I haven't helped anyone yet. Just enforce the law as written. Brennan pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. But between you and me, I've known Garrick Frost for 5 years. He's a man who likes control, likes having power over people. The kind of man who'd view a dependent child not as a responsibility, but as property. You think he's capable of what she says he did? I think powerful men are capable of a lot of things when they believe no one will hold them accountable. Brennan replaced his hat. Where is she? Caleb hesitated. Trusting anyone felt dangerous right now. I'm not going to arrest you, Brennan said quietly. And I'm not going to take her back to Garrick, but I need to hear her story directly. Because if what you're suggesting is true, this is bigger than a family dispute. This is criminal abuse of a child. Caleb made his decision. She's in the hills, about 2 miles north. There's a cave system. You willing to take me there? On one condition, you let me explain first. Let me tell you what she told me. Because she's terrified, Marshall. And one more adult demanding answers might break something in her that can't be fixed. Brennan considered this. All right, talk while we walk. They headed north across the scorched earth, and Caleb told him everything. About finding Lena in the barn, about the starvation, the cellar, the systematic cruelty disguised as discipline, about how she'd fled in desperation, believing she was going to die if she stayed. Brennan listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. She have any proof? He asked when Caleb finished. Her body. She was covered in bruises when I found her. Dehydrated, malnourished. She's gained weight since being here, but you can still see it in her face, how thin she was. That's evidence of neglect. But Garrick will claim she ran away before he could feed her properly, that the bruises came from her time on the road. So what can we do? We need more. Witnesses, documentation, something that directly contradicts his version of events. They reached the rocks and Caleb called out softly. Lena, it's Caleb. I'm here with Marshall Brennan. He's here to help. For a long moment, nothing. Then Lena emerged from the cave entrance, small and wary. When she saw the badge on Brennan's chest, she went rigid. It's all right, Caleb said quickly. He's not with Garrick. He stopped them from searching the hills. Brennan removed his hat and knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. Hello, Lena. My name is Jacob Brennan. I'm a territorial marshal, which means I work for the federal government, not the local courts. Mr. Rowan told me what happened to you. I'd like to hear it from you if you're willing to tell me. Lena looked at Caleb. He nodded encouragement. Slowly, haltingly, she told her story again. Brennan listened with absolute focus, occasionally asking gentle questions for clarification but never pushing. When she finished, she was crying silently, and Caleb had to fight the urge to pull her into a protective embrace. Thank you, Brennan said quietly. I know that wasn't easy. You're very brave. Will you make me go back? Lena whispered. No, not to Garrick. I promise you that. Then where will I go? Brennan looked at Caleb, a question in his eyes. Caleb answered it without hesitation. She stays with me, if that's what she wants. I want that, Lena said quickly. The legal situation is complicated, Brennan said. Garrick is her legal guardian. Taking her away requires proof of abuse, a court hearing, a judge's ruling. That process takes time. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. She doesn't have months, Caleb said. Garrick's not going to stop. You saw him today. He'll come back with more men, more legal maneuvers. He'll find a way. I know. Brennan stood up, his expression thoughtful. Which is why we need to change the game. Stop reacting to his moves and make some of our own. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we investigate Garrick Frost. Thoroughly. A man who'd abuse one child might have other victims, other people he's hurt. If we can find them, get them to talk, we build a case that's impossible to ignore. That's dangerous, Caleb said. People who cross Garrick tend to regret it. Then we find people who've already been hurt badly enough that they've got nothing left to lose. Brennan looked at Lena. Do you know anyone else who might have been mistreated by your uncle? Anyone who worked for him, stayed with him? Lena thought hard. There was a woman, Mrs. Chen. She worked as his housekeeper before me. He fired her suddenly. I heard his wife saying it was because she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Mrs. Chen, Brennan repeated. Any relation to Samuel Chen, who runs the dry goods store? His wife, Lena confirmed. Caleb felt a spark of hope. Samuel Chen was honest, well-liked, and had no particular loyalty to Garrick. If his wife had evidence of wrongdoing and was willing to speak, that could change everything. I'll talk to them, Brennan said. Quietly, see what she knows. What about Lena? Where does she go in the meantime? She stays hidden, right here, or wherever Mr. Rowan thinks is safest. I'll make sure Garrick and his men are occupied elsewhere while we work. How? A slight smile crossed Brennan's face. I'm going to inform Mr. Frost that I'm opening an official investigation into the circumstances of his niece's disappearance. That'll keep him busy trying to cover his tracks instead of searching your property. They spent another hour discussing details and contingencies. Brennan gave Caleb a way to contact him, a coded message that could be left at the telegraph office. Then he prepared to leave. One more thing, he said to Lena. You said Garrick locked you in the cellar. Did he do that often? 3 times, maybe 4? How long each time? A day, sometimes 2. And during that time, did anyone else in the household know? His wife? The children? Lena hesitated. Mrs. Frost knew. She brought me water once. She said she was sorry, but that Garrick was the head of the household and she couldn't go against him. Brennan's expression hardened. She brought you water, but didn't let you out. She said it was for my own good, that Garrick was teaching me discipline. That's complicity, Brennan said quietly. She's as guilty as he is. He left as the sun was beginning its descent, riding east toward Marston. Caleb and Lena made their way back to the farmhouse as darkness gathered. The heat was finally breaking, a slight breeze stirring the air. That night, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that they'd reached a turning point. Either things would get better or they'd get much worse. There was no middle ground anymore. Lena seemed to sense it too. She was quiet at dinner, pushing food around her plate. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. I'm thinking about Mrs. Frost, how she knew what was happening and didn't stop it. Some people convince themselves that doing nothing is the same as being innocent. Is it? No. Silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of cruelty. She looked at him with those 2 old eyes. If Marshal Brennan finds people to testify against Garrick, will they be in danger? Probably. Is it worth it? Putting other people at risk? Caleb thought about how to answer that. Lena, evil men stay in power because good people are too afraid to stand against them. Every person who speaks up makes it a little easier for the next person. Eventually, the fear breaks, but someone has to go first. What if no one does? Then people like you keep suffering, and men like Garrick keep winning. She absorbed this in silence. Finally, she said, I want to testify too. When it goes to court, I want to tell everyone what he did. That's going to be hard, scary. I know, but if I don't speak up, who will? Pride swelled in Caleb's chest. This child who'd been broken and starved and terrorized was finding her strength, not the strength to endure which she'd already proven she had, but the strength to fight back. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he said. For now, you stay safe and let the marshal do his work. 2 days passed. Caleb worked the farm, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept expecting Garrick to return with reinforcements, but the road stayed empty. On the 3rd day, a rider appeared. Not Garrick, but a boy from town carrying a message. The note was brief and unsigned, but Caleb recognized Brennan's handwriting. Found 3 witnesses, coming tomorrow with papers. Be ready. Caleb burned the note and sent the boy back with a coin for his trouble. That night, he told Lena what was coming. Tomorrow, things are going to move fast, he said. Marshal Brennan has found people willing to testify against Garrick. He's going to bring official charges, but Garrick's going to fight back hard. What should I do? Stay close, stay ready. And Lena, whatever happens, remember that you're not alone anymore. You've got people on your side now. She nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. Fear mixed with something else. Hope, maybe, or determination. The next morning, Brennan arrived with the sunrise, accompanied by 2 other federal officers and a woman Caleb recognized as Mrs. Chen. She looked nervous but resolute, clutching a worn leather journal to her chest. Mr. Rowan, Brennan said, is Lena here? Inside. Good. We need her present for this. What I'm about to do needs to be witnessed properly. They gathered in Caleb's main room. Mrs. Chen sat at the table, Lena beside her. Brennan stood, holding a sheaf of papers. Mrs. Chen has agreed to give sworn testimony regarding Garrick Frost's treatment of household staff and dependents, he began. She's documented instances of physical abuse, wage theft, and intimidation spanning 3 years. Additionally, She witnessed the abuse of Lena Frost on multiple occasions, but was threatened into silence. He set the papers on the table. They were covered in neat handwriting, dates, times, descriptions of incidents. "This is enough for an arrest warrant," Brennan continued. "Combined with Lena's testimony and a medical examination documenting her malnutrition and injuries, we have grounds for criminal charges." "What charges?" Caleb asked. "Child endangerment, abuse, unlawful imprisonment." Brennan's voice was hard. "If we're lucky, we'll find evidence of worse." Mrs. Chen spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something else. Something I heard but couldn't prove." Everyone turned to look at her. 2 months ago, a man came to see Garrick. Late at night, I was cleaning upstairs and overheard them talking. The man was asking about buying labor, specifically young girls who could work without being missed. Horror crawled up Caleb's spine. What did Garrick say? He said he might have someone available soon, that he was tired of supporting dead weight and would welcome the opportunity to recoup his investment. Mrs. Chen's hands trembled. "I think he was planning to sell Lena." The room went silent. Lena had gone white, her breathing quick and shallow. "Did you recognize the man's voice?" Brennan asked. "No, but he mentioned moving west, said he had operations in California that were always looking for workers." "Operations that use child labor," Brennan said grimly. "Probably mining camps or factory work. Completely illegal and absolutely brutal." Caleb felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. He was going to sell her into slavery. Indentured servitude, technically, but yes, essentially the same thing. Brennan looked at Lena. "Did Garrick ever mention anything about sending you away? Somewhere you could work?" Lena shook her head, still pale. "No, but the last week I was there, men started coming to the house, strangers. Garrick would take them into his study. I heard him say once that he was finalizing arrangements." "That's why you ran when you did," Caleb said quietly. "You sensed something was coming." "I just knew I had to get out. I couldn't explain why. I just knew." Brennan gathered his papers. "This changes everything. We're no longer dealing with abuse. We're dealing with conspiracy to commit human trafficking. That's a federal crime. It means I have full jurisdiction and authority to arrest Garrick Frost immediately." "When?" Caleb asked. "Today. This morning. Before he can run or hide evidence." Brennan looked at his fellow officers. "We ride for Marston now. Mr. Rowan, I need you and Lena to come with us. Lena's testimony will be crucial, and I want you both under federal protection." "What about Garrick's hired guns?" "They're criminals aiding and abetting a trafficker. If they resist, they'll be arrested too, or dealt with accordingly." Caleb looked at Lena. She was scared, but her jaw was set with determination. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll testify." "Then let's end this," Brennan said. They rode toward Marston as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the morning coolness. Caleb kept Lena close, one hand on the reins, the other on his rifle. Beside them, Brennan and his officers rode with the calm purpose of men who'd done this before and knew exactly how dangerous it could be. By the time they reached the edge of town, word had already started to spread. People stood in doorways and windows, watching the federal officers ride past. Caleb could see the questions on their faces, the curiosity and concern. They stopped in front of Garrick Frost's mercantile. The building was large and well-maintained, a symbol of prosperity and respectability, but Caleb looked at it now and saw only a facade hiding rot. Brennan dismounted and handed his reins to one of his officers. "Stay here," he said to Caleb and Lena. "This might get ugly." He walked to the door, flanked by his men, and pushed it open. The sound of the bell chiming seemed obscene in the heavy silence. From where he sat on his horse, Caleb couldn't see what was happening inside, but he heard voices raised in anger, the crash of something heavy hitting the floor. Then a gunshot. Lena flinched, and Caleb put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he murmured. The shot was followed by shouting, more crashes, and then sudden quiet. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. Had Garrick killed Brennan? Had the officers killed Garrick? Then the door opened and Brennan emerged, unharmed. Behind him, 2 officers dragged Garrick Frost out in shackles. The merchant's face was twisted with rage and disbelief, his expensive suit torn and dirty. "This is illegal," Garrick shouted. "I demand to speak to my attorney. I demand—" You demand nothing, Brennan said coldly. Garrick Frost, you're under arrest for child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. You'll be transported to the territorial prison to await trial. Garrick's eyes found Lena, and the hatred in them was terrible to see. You lying little... That's enough, Brennan snapped. One more word and I'll add threatening a witness to your charges. They loaded Garrick onto a horse, his hands bound. As they prepared to leave, a woman emerged from the mercantile, Mrs. Frost, pale and shaking. Where are you taking my husband? She demanded. To prison, Brennan said. And Mrs. Frost, I'd advise you to find yourself a good attorney. Complicity in these crimes carries its own penalties. She looked at Lena then, and for just a moment, something like shame crossed her face. But it vanished quickly, replaced by defensive anger. This is all lies, slander. Garrick is a good man, a respected... Ma'am, Brennan interrupted quietly. You brought water to a child locked in a cellar and left her there to starve. That makes you an accomplice. Now step aside. They rode out of Marston with Garrick in custody, leaving behind a town in shock. As they moved into open country, Caleb finally allowed himself to breathe. It was over. Not completely. There would still be a trial, still be legal battles and testimony and scrutiny, but the immediate danger had passed. Lena was safe. Garrick was in chains. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had finally arrived. The ride back to the farm was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. Not the silence of fear or tension, but something closer to exhaustion mixed with cautious relief. Lena sat in front of Caleb on his horse, her small body finally relaxing against him as the adrenaline drained away. Behind them, Brennan and his officers escorted Garrick Frost toward the territorial prison, and with each mile that separated them, the weight on Caleb's chest grew lighter. When they reached the farmhouse, the sun was high and merciless, beating down on the parched earth. Caleb helped Lena dismount and watched as she stood there for a moment, looking at the simple house and barn as if seeing them for the first time. You all right? He asked. She nodded slowly. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and he'll still be out there, still looking for me. He's locked up now. Can't hurt you anymore. But there's still the trial, right? Marshal Brennan said there'd be a trial. Yeah, there will be. And I'll have to testify. In front of everyone. Caleb knelt down so he was eye level with her. You will. But you won't be alone. I'll be right there with you, and Brennan will make sure you're safe. She looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much. What if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm lying like Garrick said? They'll believe you because you're not the only one testifying anymore. Mrs. Chen's testimony, the evidence Brennan found, your own condition when I found you, it all adds up. The truth has weight, Lena. It's heavier than lies. She seemed to accept this, though doubt still lingered in her expression. They went inside and Caleb made lunch while Lena sat at the table, quiet and thoughtful. She ate mechanically, her mind clearly elsewhere. That afternoon, as Caleb was tending to the chickens, he heard a wagon approaching. He tensed instinctively, his hand moving toward the rifle he'd propped against the barn wall. But when the wagon came into view, he recognized the driver, Samuel Chen, with his wife beside him. Caleb walked out to meet them. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, offering his hand. Mr. Rowan, he said, I hope we're not intruding. Not at all. What brings you out here? Samuel glanced at his wife, who'd remained on the wagon seat. She looked pale, but determined, the same expression she'd worn that morning when she'd given her testimony. We heard what happened in town, Samuel said, about Garrick's arrest, about what he did to that child. His voice dropped. My wife told me she'd spoken to the marshal, that she'd testified. I wanted to come out here and see if there was anything we could do to help. You've already done more than enough, Caleb said. Your wife's testimony is what made this possible. Mrs. Chen spoke from the wagon. Is Lena here? I'd like to speak with her, if that's all right. Caleb looked toward the house and saw Lena standing in the doorway, watching. He nodded to her, and she came out slowly, stopping a few feet away. Mrs. Chen climbed down from the wagon and walked over to her. For a long moment, the two of them just looked at each other. The woman who'd witnessed abuse and stayed silent, and the child who'd suffered because of that silence. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I should have spoken up sooner. I should have done something when I first saw what was happening to you." Lena said nothing, her face unreadable. "I was afraid," Mrs. Chen continued. "Garrick threatened my husband's business. He said if I talked about what I saw in his household, he'd ruin us. I believed him, and so I kept quiet, and I've hated myself for it every day since." "Why did you finally speak up?" Lena asked. "Because I realized that some things are worse than being ruined. Living with the knowledge that I let a child suffer to protect my own comfort, that's worse. That's something I couldn't live with anymore." Lena considered this. Then slowly, she nodded. "Thank you for telling the marshal, even if it was late." Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "You're very generous. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "I didn't say I forgave you," Lena said simply, "but I'm glad you finally did the right thing." The honesty of it seemed to hit Mrs. Chen hard, but she accepted it with a nod. "That's fair, more than fair." Samuel spoke up. "We brought some supplies. Thought you might need them." He gestured to the wagon bed, which was loaded with flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and other staples. "No charge. Consider it our way of trying to make amends." Caleb wanted to refuse, pride told him to, but practicality won out. His own supplies were running low, and with everything that had happened, he hadn't had time to make the trip to town. "I appreciate that. Thank you." They unloaded the supplies together, carrying them into the house. When they'd finished, Samuel lingered for a moment. "There's something else you should know," he said. "The town's divided. Some people are shocked by what Garrick did. Others are defending him, saying it's all lies and exaggeration. Things might get ugly before they get better." "How ugly?" "Hard to say, but there are people who owe Garrick money, people whose businesses depend on his goodwill. They're not going to want to believe he's capable of what he's accused of, and they're going to be angry at anyone who speaks against him." Caleb felt a chill despite the heat. "You think they'd come after Lena?" "I think they might come after anyone associated with bringing him down. You, me, my wife, Marshal Brennan, we're all targets now." "Then we watch our backs." Samuel nodded grimly. "Already doing that. I've got my rifle loaded and ready, and I've sent word to some friends, people I trust. They're keeping an eye on things." After the Chens left, Caleb found himself pacing the property, checking sightlines and thinking about defenses. He thought the danger was over with Garrick's arrest, but Samuel was right. The real battle was just beginning. That night, Lena had nightmares. Caleb woke to the sound of her crying out and rushed to her room. She was tangled in the sheets, thrashing and calling for help. He sat on the edge of the bed and spoke her name softly until she woke. She bolted upright, gasping, her face wet with tears. "He was here. Garrick was here. He was taking me away and no one would help me." "It was just a dream. You're safe, I promise." But she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Caleb did something he hadn't done since Martha died. He reached out and pulled her into a careful embrace, letting her cry against his shoulder. She clung to him like a drowning person clings to driftwood. "I'm so tired of being scared," she sobbed. "I'm so tired." I know you are." "When does it stop?" He didn't have an answer for that. Fear didn't have a schedule. Trauma didn't heal on command. So instead of lying to her, he just held her and let her cry until she was empty. When she finally pulled back, exhausted, he said, "You want to know something? Being scared doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. What makes you strong is that you keep going anyway." "I don't feel strong." "You are, though. Stronger than most adults I know. You faced down the man who hurt you. You told the truth even though it was terrifying. That's courage, Lena. Real courage." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep?" "Yeah, I'll stay." He sat in the chair by her window while she settled back into bed. It took a long time, but eventually her breathing evened out and she slept. Caleb remained there until dawn, watching over her, rifle across his knees. The next few days passed in uneasy peace. Brennan sent word that Garrick was being held without bail, deemed a flight risk given the severity of the charges. The territorial prosecutor was building the case, interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence. The trial was scheduled for 6 weeks out to be held in the territorial capital where Garrick's influence would be less potent. Caleb used the time to prepare. He taught Lena more survival skills, more ways to protect herself. He reinforced the doors and windows of the house. He made sure she knew how to shoot accurately, how to reload quickly, how to keep calm under pressure. But he also made sure she had time to be a child. They spent evenings on the porch watching the sunset. He taught her to play checkers with a set he found in the attic. She helped him tend the garden, and he showed her how to coax stubborn plants into growing despite the drought. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after Garrick's arrest, Lena asked him a question that caught him off guard. "If I have to go to an orphanage after the trial, will you visit me?" Caleb stopped what he was doing, mending a fence post, and turned to look at her. "What makes you think you're going to an orphanage?" "Because I don't have any family left, and you're not really my family, so they'll have to put me somewhere." He set down his tools and walked over to where she stood. "Lena, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're not going to an orphanage. You're staying here with me. But the law says you need a legal guardian, and I'm going to petition the court to become exactly that." She stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "You want to adopt me?" "If you want me to. I'm not trying to replace your parents. Nobody could do that. But you need a home, and I can give you one, a real one, where you're safe and fed and wanted." "You really want me to stay?" "Yeah, I really do." She launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding on tight. Caleb hugged her back, feeling something shift in his chest. The final piece of the wall he'd built 3 years ago crumbling away. "We'll make it official after the trial," he said. "But as far as I'm concerned, you're already mine to protect, and I don't let go of what's mine." The weeks crawled by. August arrived with even more brutal heat, the kind that made the air shimmer and turned midday into something to be endured rather than lived. But on the last day of the month, clouds appeared on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. By evening, rain was falling, the first real rain in months. Caleb and Lena stood on the porch and watched it come down, soaking into the thirsty earth. The smell of wet dirt filled the air, rich and alive. Lena held out her hand, letting the drops hit her palm. "It's beautiful," she said. "Yeah, it is. Do you think it's a sign that things are going to get better?" Caleb looked at her, this child who'd been through hell and somehow still had the capacity for hope. "I think it's just rain, but sometimes rain is enough." The trial date arrived faster than expected. Brennan sent a wagon to collect them, along with an armed escort. The journey to the territorial capital took 2 days, and they spent the nights at way stations, always with guards posted. Caleb could see the toll it took on Lena, the constant vigilance, the fear that Garrick's allies might try something. But she held herself together with a determination that amazed him. The territorial capital was a larger town than Marston, with actual paved streets and multi-story buildings. The courthouse was an imposing structure of stone and timber, designed to project authority and permanence. When they arrived, a crowd had already gathered, curious onlookers, journalists from territorial papers, and a cluster of well-dressed men who Caleb assumed were Garrick's supporters. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Caleb and Lena sat in the front row with Brennan and the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Morse, who'd made her reputation taking down corrupt officials. Across the aisle, Garrick Frost sat with his attorneys, looking thinner and paler than when Caleb had last seen him, but his eyes still held that same cold calculation. The judge was an older man named Silas Warren, known for his fairness and his refusal to be intimidated by wealth or status. He called the court to order, and the trial began. The prosecution laid out its case methodically. They presented Mrs. Chen's testimony first, her journal entries documenting years of abuse and intimidation. Then came testimony from 2 other former employees who'd witnessed Garrick's cruelty. A doctor testified about Lena's condition when she'd first been examined: severe malnutrition, dehydration, bruising consistent with physical abuse. The defense attorneys tried to poke holes in the testimony, suggesting that Mrs. Chen had fabricated her journal, that the other witnesses were disgruntled employees with axes to grind, that Lena's condition could have resulted from her time on the run rather than her time in Garrick's care. But then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The prosecution called Lena Frost to the stand. She walked to the witness box with her head high, though Caleb could see her hands trembling. The bailiff swore her in, and she sat down, looking very small in the large chair. Catherine Morse approached gently. Lena, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court what happened to you while you were living with your Uncle Garrick Frost. Lena took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger as she went on. She told them everything: the starvation, the cellar, the labor, the fear. She described what it felt like to be so hungry that eating raw grain seemed reasonable, what it felt like to believe she was going to die and that no one would care. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even Garrick's attorneys seemed shaken. When she finished, Morse asked, Lena, why didn't you tell anyone what was happening? Because I did tell people, Lena said simply. I told Mrs. Frost. I told the grocer when Garrick sent me to buy supplies. I told the doctor when he came to treat Garrick's children for influenza. And every single time I was told I was exaggerating, that I should be grateful, that Garrick was a good man doing his Christian duty by taking me in. What made you finally run away? I heard him talking to a stranger about selling me. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know that if I stayed, I was going to disappear. So I left. The defense attorney, a slick-looking man named Morrison, stood for cross-examination. Miss Frost, isn't it true that you have a history of making up stories? No, Lena said firmly. Your uncle has testified that you often invented tales to get attention, that you were prone to fantasy. My uncle is a liar. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Morrison's expression tightened. That's quite an accusation. Can you prove he's lying? Can he prove he's telling the truth? Lena shot back. Because I have scars. I have witnesses. I have a doctor's report. What does he have? Words. And words are easy when you're rich and respected. Morrison tried several more angles of attack, but Lena didn't waver. She answered each question with calm clarity, never letting him rattle her. By the time he sat down, he looked frustrated and Lena looked unshakable. The prosecution rested its case. The defense put on their own witnesses, character witnesses who testified to Garrick's reputation, to his charitable works, to his standing in the community. But their testimony felt hollow against the weight of what had come before. Then the defense made a mistake. They called Garrick himself to testify. He took the stand with the same arrogant confidence he'd always projected. He denied everything, said Lena was disturbed, said she'd always been difficult, said he'd done his best with a traumatized child and this was the thanks he received. Catherine Morse stood for cross-examination and smiled. Mr. Frost, you testified that you provided adequate food for Lena. Is that correct? Yes. Meals 3 times a day. Then how do you explain the doctor's testimony that she was severely malnourished? She ran away. Obviously, she didn't eat properly while she was gone. She was gone for less than 2 days when she was found. Medical testimony indicates her malnutrition was the result of months of inadequate food. Garrick's jaw tightened. The doctor is mistaken. Or you're lying. Morse pulled out a ledger. This is a household account book seized from your home. It shows food purchases for your household over the past year. According to these records, you purchased enough food to adequately feed 4 people. You had 5 people living in your home. Where did the 5th person's portion go? That's not accurate. My wife must have kept poor records. Your wife testified that she kept meticulous records under your direct supervision. Then she's lying to protect herself. So your wife is lying, the doctor is lying, Mrs. Chen is lying, your former employees are lying, and your 9-year-old niece is lying. Is that your testimony? Garrick's face had gone red. They're all conspiring against me. Or, Morse said quietly, you abused a child in your care, and you're exactly what the prosecution says you are, a cruel, calculating man who saw a vulnerable orphan as an opportunity for free labor. The defense attorney objected, but the damage was done. Garrick had lost his composure, and the jury had seen it. The trial lasted 3 more days. Both sides gave their closing arguments. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted. Garrick's supporters shouted protests. His attorneys demanded immediate appeal. But Judge Warren brought down his gavel and silence fell. "Garrick Frost," the judge said, his voice hard as iron, "you have been found guilty of child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy to commit human trafficking. The evidence presented in this court reveals a pattern of cruelty and calculation that is incompatible with civilized society. You took a vulnerable child and treated her as property to be exploited and discarded. There can be no excuse for such behavior." He paused, looking directly at Garrick. "It is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, to be served at hard labor with no possibility of parole for the first 10 years. In addition, all of your assets are to be liquidated and placed in trust for Lena Frost, to be administered by a court-appointed guardian until she reaches majority. You are hereby stripped of all parental rights and guardianship over any minor children. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down again, final and absolute. Garrick was led away in chains, shouting about injustice and conspiracy. But his voice faded as the guards pulled him from the courtroom, and then he was gone. Caleb looked at Lena. She was crying, but this time they were tears of relief, of release. "It's over," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said, "it's really over." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew there was still one more battle to fight. Because while Garrick was going to prison, Lena's legal status was still unresolved. She was now a ward of the state, wealthy from the liquidation of Garrick's assets, but without a legal guardian. 2 days after the trial, Caleb filed his petition with the territorial court. He wanted to adopt Lena, to make permanent what already felt true in his heart, but the response he received was not what he'd hoped for. A letter arrived from the territorial family court, informing him that his petition had been received and was under review. However, there was a complication. A relative had come forward claiming legal custody of Lena Frost, a distant cousin on her father's side, a man named Victor Frost who lived in Denver and who had substantial means and social standing. The court had scheduled a hearing to determine the best placement for Lena. And the hearing would include a test, a challenge to prove that Lena truly belonged with Caleb rather than with blood family, regardless of how distant. Caleb showed Lena the letter, his jaw tight with frustration. "Did you know you had a cousin named Victor?" She shook her head. "I've never heard that name. My father never mentioned him." "The letter says he's successful, wealthy, has a large house in Denver with servants and all the advantages." Lena's face went pale. "I don't want to go to Denver. I want to stay here, with you." "I know, and I'm going to fight for that. But Lena, the court might not see it that way. They might think you'd be better off with blood family, with money and education and opportunity." "I don't care about money. I care about being safe, about being wanted. I know that, but we have to prove it to them." The hearing was set for 2 weeks away, and the challenge the court had devised was unusual, even cruel in Caleb's estimation. They wanted Lena to demonstrate that she belonged to the land and life she'd chosen, to prove through action that her connection to Caleb's farm was genuine and lasting. The test would be simple but brutal. Lena would be required to complete a full day's worth of farm labor in the height of summer heat. If she succeeded, it would demonstrate commitment and capability. If she failed, the court would view her attachment to Caleb as temporary sentiment rather than genuine belonging. Caleb was furious. "She's 9 years old. This isn't fair." Brennan, who delivered the news, looked equally disgusted. "I agree. But the judge handling the custody matter is old-fashioned. He believes that character is proven through hardship." And Victor Frost's attorney suggested the challenge, arguing that if Lena can't handle farm life, she doesn't truly belong there. "It's designed to make her fail." "Probably. But it's the hand we've been dealt." Caleb looked at Lena. "You don't have to do this. We can fight it another way." But Lena's expression was determined. "No, I'll do it. I'll prove I belong here." "Lena, I've survived worse than hard work, Caleb. I can do this." And looking at her, small but fierce, scarred but unbroken, Caleb believed her. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb worked with Lena every day, not to train her for the test. She already knew how to work hard, that had been beaten into her by Garrick, but to build her strength back up. She'd gained weight since coming to the farm, but months of starvation had taken their toll. Her muscles were still weak, her endurance limited. They started small, carrying water buckets from the spring house to the garden, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs, mucking out the barn stalls. Each day, Caleb pushed her a little further, watching carefully for signs that she was overdoing it. But Lena never complained. She worked with grim determination, her jaw set, her eyes focused. On the 5th day, Samuel Chen arrived with his wife and 3 other families from town, people who'd been quietly horrified by what had come out during the trial, who wanted to help but hadn't known how. They brought food, supplies, and something more valuable, their presence. They wanted Lena to know she wasn't alone in this. Mrs. Chen pulled Caleb aside while the others were unloading their wagons. We heard about the challenge, about what they're making her do. Word travels fast. It's wrong, she's a child. I know, but unless the judge changes his mind, we're stuck with it. Mrs. Chen looked at Lena, who was talking shyly with some of the other children who'd come. She's stronger than she looks. She's had to be. We want to be there, at the hearing, as witnesses to her character. Caleb felt something catch in his throat. You do that? Of course, she spoke the truth when it cost her everything. The least we can do is stand beside her when she needs support. The night before the challenge, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch long after Lena had gone to bed, staring out at the dark fields and thinking about everything that could go wrong. The heat had been relentless this week, pushing past 100 degrees every afternoon. If Lena collapsed from heat exhaustion or simply couldn't complete the work, the court would rule against them. She'd be sent to Denver, to a stranger who wanted her for reasons Caleb didn't trust. He heard the door open behind him and turned to see Lena standing there in her nightgown, barefoot on the worn wooden boards. Can't sleep either, he asked. She shook her head and came to sit beside him. For a while they just sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, crickets and distant coyotes, and the whisper of hot wind through dry grass. I'm scared, Lena finally said. That's all right. Being scared is normal. What if I can't do it? What if I fail and they take me away? Caleb chose his words carefully. Then we'll fight it another way. We'll appeal. We'll find a different judge. We'll do whatever it takes. But Lena, I don't think you're going to fail. You're one of the toughest people I've ever met. I don't feel tough. I feel tired. Tough doesn't mean not being tired. It means keeping going even when you are. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her small shoulders. Tell me about Martha again, she said quietly. About what she was like. Caleb smiled slightly. This had become a ritual between them over the past weeks. Lena asking about Martha, Caleb sharing memories he'd locked away for too long. She had this laugh, he said, loud and completely unself-conscious. When something really tickled her, she'd throw her head back and just let it out. I used to love making her laugh just to hear it. What made her laugh? Stupid things. Me tripping over my own feet, the chickens acting foolish. One time I tried to surprise her by baking bread and I forgot the salt entirely. She took one bite and laughed so hard she cried. Then she taught me how to do it properly. Do you think she'd like me? The question pierced him. Yeah, I think she'd love you. I think she'd be proud of how brave you've been. I wish I could have met her. Me too. They sat there until Lena's breathing evened out and she dozed against his shoulder. Caleb carried her back to bed, tucked her in, and finally managed to sleep a few hours himself. The morning of the challenge arrived with a sky already bleached white with heat. The court officials arrived at dawn, Judge Warren himself, along with 2 clerks to document everything, and Victor Frost. Caleb got his first look at Lena's distant cousin as the man stepped down from an expensive carriage. Victor was in his late 30s, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Caleb made in a year. He had the same dark hair as Lena, the same sharp features, but where her eyes held depth and hard-won wisdom, his held calculation. Mr. Rowan, Victor said, extending his hand. I've heard a great deal about you. Caleb shook it briefly. Mr. Frost, please call me Victor. After all, we both want what's best for young Lena. Do we? Victor's smile didn't waver. Of course, she's family, blood. And with her inheritance from Garrick's estate, she deserves the finest education, the best opportunities. Things a farm in the middle of nowhere simply cannot provide. She deserves to be safe, to be wanted for who she is, not what she's worth. I assure you, my interest is purely in her welfare. Caleb studied him and saw the lie. Victor wanted Lena's money, wanted control of the trust fund. It was Garrick all over again, just wrapped in better clothes and prettier words. Judge Warren called them all together in the yard. He was a stern man, but Caleb had seen fairness in him during the trial. He hoped to see it again now. This is an unusual proceeding, the judge began. But these are unusual circumstances. Miss Frost, do you understand what's being asked of you today? Lena stood straight, her hands clasped in front of her. She'd dressed in work clothes, a simple dress, sturdy boots, a wide-brimmed hat to keep off the sun. Yes, sir, I have to complete a full day's work on the farm. That's correct. The work will be assigned by the court clerks, observed and documented throughout. You'll begin at sunrise and finish at sunset. The tasks will be appropriate to farm life, but demanding. If you complete them successfully, it will demonstrate your commitment to this life. If you cannot, the court will consider that you may be better suited to a different environment. Do you have any questions? No, sir. Very well. Mr. Rowan, you are not to assist her in any way. You may provide water and brief rest periods, but the work must be done entirely by Miss Frost's own effort. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor. Then we'll begin. The first task was hauling water. The clerks had measured out the distance from the spring house to the garden, roughly 100 yards over uneven ground. Lena was to carry 2 full buckets, make the trip 20 times, and water the entire garden plot. In the building heat, it was brutal work. Caleb watched as she filled the first 2 buckets and lifted them. They were heavy, and he could see her arms trembling with the strain, but she set her jaw and started walking. The first few trips went smoothly, but by the 10th trip she was struggling. The buckets seemed to get heavier with each journey, and the sun climbed higher, turning the air thick and punishing. Sweat poured down her face. Her breathing grew labored. Victor stood in the shade of the porch, watching with an expression of concerned sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. This seems cruel, he said to the judge. She's just a child. Surely this proves she's not suited for such a life. She hasn't quit yet, the judge replied neutrally. On the 15th trip, Lena stumbled, and one of the buckets sloshed, losing some of its water. She stopped, breathing hard, and for a moment Caleb thought she might give up. But then she bent down, refilled the bucket from a nearby trough, and kept going. 20 trips. By the time she poured out the last bucket over the thirsty tomato plants, her face was flushed red and her hands were shaking. But she'd done it. The judge nodded to his clerks, who made notes. Well done, Miss Frost. You may take a 15-minute rest. There's water in the shade. Lena drank deeply and sat with her back against the barn wall, her chest heaving. Caleb wanted to go to her, to tell her she'd done enough, that no one could ask more. But the rules forbade him from interfering. All he could do was watch. The second task was mucking out the barn. There were 4 stalls that needed cleaning, old hay and manure to be shoveled out, new hay to be spread. It was hot, dirty work that would test her endurance and her willingness to do unpleasant labor. Lena picked up the shovel and started. The work was slow, methodical. She had to stop frequently to catch her breath, to wipe sweat from her eyes. The smell was terrible in the heat, and twice she had to step outside to keep from being sick. But each time she went back in and kept working. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun reached its zenith, turning the barn into an oven. Caleb could see her flagging, her movements getting slower and less coordinated. He looked at the judge, silently pleading for mercy. She's permitted another rest period, Judge Warren said. Miss Frost, you've been working for over 4 hours. Take 30 minutes, eat something, drink more water. Lena came out of the barn, her clothes soaked with sweat and filthy with dirt. Mrs. Chen had brought food earlier, and Caleb handed Lena bread and cheese and made her eat, even though she said she wasn't hungry. How much more? She asked quietly. I don't know, but Lena, you can stop. You've already proven more than anyone should have to. She shook her head stubbornly. No, I'm finishing this. The afternoon tasks were worse. The clerks assigned her to repair a section of fence that had fallen into disrepair, digging new post holes, setting posts, stringing wire. It was work that would challenge a grown man, let alone a 9-year-old girl who'd been starved for months. Caleb watched her dig, watched her struggle with the heavy posts, watched her small hands bleed as the wire bit into them. He saw people from town who'd gathered to witness this, Samuel Chen and his wife, other families who'd come to support Lena. They looked as anguished as he felt. Victor, by contrast, looked pleased. He probably thought she was going to collapse, that this whole exercise would prove his point, but Lena didn't collapse. She bled. She cried. She stumbled and fell twice, but she kept working. By late afternoon, she'd set 3 posts and strung wire between them. The 4th post hole was only half dug when the judge called time. "Miss Frost, it's after 5 o'clock. You have 2 hours until sunset. This is your final task." Lena stood leaning on the shovel, her whole body shaking with exhaustion. "What is it?" "You need to finish this fence line. 1 more post. Then you're done." She looked at the half-dug hole, looked at the post line on the ground, looked at the sun sinking slowly toward the horizon. "I can do it," she said, her voice barely audible. She went back to digging. Each shovelful of earth seemed to take enormous effort. Her movements were mechanical now, driven by pure will rather than strength. Caleb saw her hands were blistered and bleeding, saw the way she had to brace herself with each thrust of the shovel. Victor stepped forward. "Your Honor, surely this has gone far enough. The child is suffering. As her blood relative, I'm requesting you end this now and place her in my custody where she can receive proper care." Judge Warren looked at Victor, then at Lena, then back at Victor. "Mr. Frost, has it occurred to you to offer her help, to step in as families should? The rules prohibit Mr. Rowan from helping, not you. If you're so concerned about her welfare, why haven't you offered to assist her?" Victor's face reddened. That would undermine the purpose of the test. Or it would demonstrate that you care more about winning than about the child herself." The silence that followed was damning. Victor had no answer. Lena kept digging. The hole grew deeper, inch by painful inch. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky gold and orange. She climbed out of the hole, dragged the post over, and tried to lift it into position. It was too heavy. She couldn't do it alone. She stood there, staring at the post, her face streaked with dirt and tears. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Samuel Chen stepped forward. "I'll help," he said simply. Mrs. Chen joined him. "So will I." Then others came forward. People from town. People who'd watched her suffer and speak truth and fight for her right to be safe. They gathered around that fence line, and together, with Lena directing them, telling them how it should be done. They lifted the post and set it in the hole. Lena packed dirt around it, tamped it down, made it solid. Then she strung the final section of wire, her bleeding hands steady despite the pain. When she stepped back, the fence line was complete, and the sun had just touched the horizon. Judge Warren walked over and inspected the work. He tugged on the wire, tested the posts. Then he turned to face everyone assembled. "I've seen enough," he said. "This test was designed to determine whether Miss Frost truly belongs to this life, whether her commitment to staying with Mr. Rowan is genuine or merely the attachment of a frightened child seeking any port in a storm." He looked at Lena, who stood swaying with exhaustion but still upright. "What I've witnessed today is not a child performing labor to earn a place. What I've witnessed is a community coming together to support one of their own. Miss Frost didn't complete this work alone, and she shouldn't have had to. That's not what family means. Family means people who stand beside you when the work is hard, people who help you carry what you cannot carry alone." He turned to Victor. "Mr. Frost, you stood in the shade and watched a child suffer. You waited for her to fail so you could claim her. That is not family. That is opportunism." Victor started to protest, but the judge held up his hand. "I've made my decision. Legal custody of Lena Frost is hereby granted to Caleb Rowan, with the adoption to be finalized within 30 days. The trust fund from Garrick Frost's estate will be administered by Mr. Rowan as her legal guardian until Miss Frost reaches majority. This ruling is final and not subject to appeal." Lena's knees buckled, and Caleb caught her before she fell. He scooped her up in his arms, this small, fierce girl who'd endured more than anyone should have to, and held her while she cried against his shoulder. "It's over," he whispered. "You're mine now. Really mine. No one can take you away. Promise?" Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "I promise." Victor left without another word, his carriage kicking up dust as it disappeared down the road. The judge and his clerks departed soon after, their work done. But the people from town stayed. They stayed while Caleb carried Lena inside and Mrs. Chen cleaned and bandaged her bleeding hands. They stayed while someone made dinner, while someone else started singing an old song about harvest and home. They stayed because this was what community meant, being present for the hard moments and the victories alike. That night, after everyone had gone, Caleb sat beside Lena's bed. She was clean now, fed, her hands properly dressed. The doctor who'd been among the witnesses had examined her and pronounced her exhausted but unharmed. She'd sleep for a day straight, he predicted, and wake up sore but healing. "Caleb?" she murmured, half asleep already. "Yeah? Am I really going to be your daughter?" "Really and truly. The papers will make it official, but as far as I'm concerned, you already are." "What do I call you?" He thought about that. "Whatever feels right to you, Caleb works fine. Or if you want, someday, maybe you'll want to call me something else. But there's no rush. We've got time to figure it out." "I think I'd like to call you Pa," she said softly. "If that's all right." The word hit him like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. "Yeah," he managed. "That's all right. That's more than all right." She smiled, her eyes already closing. Within moments, she was asleep. Caleb sat there for a long time, watching her breathe, watching the peaceful expression on her face. He thought about Martha, about the child they'd never gotten to raise. He thought about how grief had hollowed him out and how Lena had somehow filled that hollow space, not with replacement, but with something new and equally precious. The summer that had brought her to him was finally breaking. That night, clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and dark. By midnight, rain was falling again. Not the scattered shower from before, but a real rain, steady and soaking. The kind that would last for days and bring the land back to life. Caleb stood on the porch and watched it fall, letting the sound of it wash over him. Tomorrow, there would be paperwork to file and a new life to build. There would be challenges ahead, raising a daughter alone, helping her heal from trauma that would take years to fully process, navigating a world that would question their unconventional family. But tonight, all that mattered was that Lena was safe, that she was his, that the worst was finally, truly over. The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, running in rivers off the eaves. It pooled in the yard and soaked into the grateful earth. And somewhere in the house behind him, a child who'd been starved and abused and nearly sold into slavery slept in safety, dreaming of a future that was finally, impossibly hers. The weeks that followed the hearing fell into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous in its ordinariness. The adoption papers were filed and processed, and on a September morning when the heat had finally broken and the air carried the first hint of autumn, Caleb and Lena stood before a judge and made it official. Her name was legally changed to Lena Rowan, and she walked out of that courthouse holding her adoption certificate like it was made of gold. The farm changed too. With the trust fund now under Caleb's careful administration, he made improvements, repaired the barn properly, dug a better well, bought chickens and a few head of cattle. But he was careful to use the money wisely, always mindful that it belonged to Lena and would be hers when she came of age. Lena healed slowly but steadily. The nightmares came less frequently. She gained weight and grew stronger. She learned to laugh again, really laugh, the way children should. Caleb enrolled her in the school in Marston, and though some of the townspeople still whispered, enough of them had witnessed her courage that she found friends and acceptance. On a Sunday afternoon in late October, they visited the small cemetery where Caleb's wife was buried. Lena had asked to go, and Caleb had agreed, though his chest felt tight as they walked between the weathered headstones. Martha's grave was simple, a wooden marker with her name and the dates of her too short life. Caleb had kept it tended over the years, but he realized as he stood there now that he hadn't visited in months. The grief was still there, but it had transformed into something gentler. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer the sharp ache that had defined his existence. "I wish I could have known her," Lena said quietly. I wish you could have too. She would have loved you, probably would have spoiled you rotten. Lena smiled at that. Then seriously she said, do you think she'd mind? About me? Mind? Lena, I think she'd be happy. Martha always wanted children, wanted a house full of noise and laughter. I think she'd look at you and see exactly what she hoped for. Even though I'm not hers? Caleb knelt down beside her. You are hers. Maybe not by blood, but by the life we're building. The life she wanted for us. You're part of that, Lena. You're part of everything good that's come from all this pain. She wrapped her arms around him, and they stood there for a while, the three of them, the living and the remembered, connected by love and loss and the strange grace of second chances. The seasons turned. Winter came, but it was mild that year, as if the land itself was giving them a reprieve after the brutal summer. Caleb taught Lena to ice skate on the frozen creek, and they spent evenings by the fire while he read to her from books they'd ordered from Denver. She grew taller, stronger, more confident. She started helping Caleb in ways that mattered, becoming a true partner in running the farm. They made decisions together, planned together, worked together. One spring evening, almost a year after she'd first stumbled into his barn, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The fields were green now, thriving. The chickens clucked contentedly. Everything was peaceful. Pa? Lena said. She'd started calling him that regularly now, and he'd never gotten tired of hearing it. Yeah? Do you remember last summer, when everything was awful and scary? Hard to forget. I was thinking about how I used to pray for things to get better. And they never did. They just got worse. So I stopped praying, stopped believing anyone was listening. That's understandable. But then I found you, or you found me, and everything changed. Not because someone answered my prayers, but because you chose to help. Because you chose to care. She looked at him with eyes that were still wise beyond her years, but now held hope instead of just pain. I think that's what miracles really are, not magic, just people choosing to be kind when they don't have to be. Caleb felt his throat tighten. You might be right about that. I'm glad you chose kindness. I'm glad you chose me. I'm glad you chose me right back. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The sounds of life continuing, of the world turning, of time moving forward. Lena had survived hell and come out the other side. Garrick was in prison where he belonged, serving his 20-year sentence. Victor had returned to Denver empty-handed and hadn't been heard from since. The town had slowly come to accept and even celebrate the unconventional family Caleb and Lena had become. But more than any of that, they had each other. A gruff farmer who'd learned to live again, and a fierce girl who'd learned that safety and love weren't just illusions. Together, they'd built something neither could have built alone. A home, a family, a future. As full darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Caleb stood. Come on, let's get inside. School tomorrow, and you need your sleep. Lena stood too, but before going in, she looked back at the land one more time. Pa, I love it here. I love this life. Good, because it's yours, all of it, for as long as you want it. Forever then? She said simply. Forever sounds about right. They went inside together, father and daughter, leaving the porch light burning against the dark, a beacon for anyone who might need it, just as Lena once had. The door closed behind them, and through the window, warm light spilled out into the night. Inside, there was laughter. There was warmth. There was love earned through fire and pain, and the simple choice to do right when wrong would have been easier. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the land breathed easy under a forgiving sky. The heat of that terrible summer was long gone, but what it had forged remained, stronger, truer, and infinitely more precious for having been tested. And in a small farmhouse in Wyoming territory, a man who'd thought his life was over and a girl who'd nearly had hers stolen away sat down to dinner together, their future stretching bright and endless before them. The story that had begun with desperation and grain eaten in darkness ended here, in light and plenty and belonging. Not perfect, because life never is, but real and good and earned. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.